as we begin the next portion of our sessions, a lunchtime discussion about gender and conflict. Just to provide a little bit of context, as you know, we've been talking about norms and gender norms throughout our time here, and how those roles vary according to socioeconomic, political, and cultural contexts, and are affected by other factors such as race, age, class, religion, ethnic group, sexual identity, sexual orientation, education, etc. So men and women are differently affected by conflict because of their roles, needs, priorities, status, and access to power and legal structures. For example, in many cultures, boys are encouraged to adopt the male ideals of toughness, strength, bravery, and aggression. These ideals promote male status of warrior, and the preparation for war is a core component of manhood. Girls, on the other hand, are often expected to take on caretaker roles, to raise families, and to be active in local communities rather than on the national and political stage. But it has been acknowledged that gender roles often change during and after violent conflict. And I wanted to also acknowledge that I think our setup this morning and the topics discussed really also kind of get us in this mindset in discussing about conflict. This morning, Tanny's presentation on chronic trauma and violence, often as a result of conflict situations. Damien's overview of the lived experience in Jamaica as well, I thought was a good presentation. And some of the strategies he presented towards peace building and healing in the community are very similar to what we do in conflict-ridden environments. And then Carla's discussion about the issues of Native peoples and the different experiences that they have, and how that also is a part of reparations and conflict in many of the settings where we work. And then, of course, our conversations about LGBT issues and how people with different sexual identities, sexual orientations are often differently affected in conflict situations and targeted for violence. And then, so as most of us are aware, women and girls are less likely to be victims of the battle-related types of physical violence that maybe men experience, but are often targets for sexual violence and domestic violence in far greater numbers, both during and after war. Women have often been particular targets as armed forces attempt to demoralize their opponents and destabilize families and communities. And so the role of women in conflict, violent extremism, and peace building is complicated and often misunderstood, from participating in extremist groups as recruiters, volunteers, and fighters, and to serving as protectors, as police officers, soldiers, and community organizers. Women act as a diverse and central force within these spheres. As the crucial role for women in these contexts continues to evolve, research and strategies related to reducing violent extremism and conflict should not ignore the powerful role that women play in these spaces. So we're fortunate to have two expert panelists talk to us today about these issues. Susan Markham is our own senior coordinator for USAID on gender equality and women's empowerment issues. And as well, we have Noreen Fink, the head of research and analysis for the Global Center for Cooperative Security. And Noreen is participating today via Telcon, so she will be listening and participating over the speakers. And they will explore the complex and pivotal role that women play in conflict situations, countering violent extremism, and peace building. So thank you, and I will let Susan talk first. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Is it okay if I just sit? It seems formal while you all are eating for me to be standing up there, but you have tended to sit on either side of the room, so it might look at times like I'm watching a tennis match, so that I can look you all in the eye. But thank you so much for having me today, Vicki, and it seems like it's been a great couple of days. I'm sorry I couldn't spend more time here, but you all know those weeks in DC where everything is scheduled and they're trying to go in between holidays and things like that, so it's been a bit of a wild week. So thank you so much. I'm going to talk about the role of women as peace builders and talk a little bit about what we're doing with countering violent extremism, which is not a topic that I joined USAID to talk about, but certainly it's an emerging field and one that we are learning more about on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. Oftentimes when we, maybe not the we in this room, but many people, normal people out there in the rural world, when they think about conflict or they think about peace processes, you think about men with guns forgiving other men with guns in order to end war. And we've allowed this one-dimensional understanding of the role of women and girls to shape our thinking, that they are victims, that we are victims. And the more we know and hear the stories, we know this is simply not the case. So today, within the framework of addressing social norms that underlie the acceptance of victims, I want to discuss the stereotypes, the history, and the current situation for women as victims, yes, but also as perpetrators, recruiters, fighters, and peacemakers. So 15 years ago, the United Nations Security Council recognized officially the important role women play in promoting peace and security globally and adopting UN Security Council Resolution 1325 that established the Women, Peace, and Security agenda and asked member states to develop a national action plan. And we have seen why women, peace, and security is so important time and time again in South Sudan, Iraq, Bosnia, Kenya, Afghanistan. Women help forge peace agreements. Women are fighters. Women are police, problem solvers, community organizers, and change agents. But women are often now more recruiters and facilitators of violence as well. And the problem is only becoming more complex and persisting. The challenges posed by an increasing number of fragile and conflict-affected states and the broader transnational threats that emerge from these territories have increased dramatically over the past 2 decades. The year 2014 was among the most deadly year on record in terms of the number of civilian deaths caused by civil wars and casualties from terrorist attacks. Today, amongst our many challenges in the security field, one of the most vexing is this violent extremism. ISIL, Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda, and others. And here we forget some of the lessons about the importance of including women. The rhetoric, the stories allow us to revert to the stereotype of women simply as victims. And make no mistake, those stories are real and women have seen horrible things happen to them and their community in these places. But women are not only victims. They have agency to prevent recruitment and to recruit, to stop people from traveling to Iraq and Syria, and also facilitate them in doing so, to participate as fighters, nation builders, peace builders, and mediators. And this is something that ISIL and other violent extremists know. They have a complete recruitment campaign tailored to women and girls, different in English and Arabic, but very focused. And yet we on this side and many other places in the world seem to forget this. We need to remember that women can play a unique and, until recently, largely untapped role. And we must tap into it to both end conflict broadly, but also to effectively prevent violent extremism. The idea of mothers, which I'm always a little bit worried about feeding into stereotypes, but mothers play an important role in children's early education. So how can we take advantage of that role that women often play to help them be engaged, to help build and sustain resilience to some of the outside forces that happen once kids start going to school? But also look beyond their roles as in the family. Women are often leaders, informal or formal, in their communities. So we need to reach out to them as communicators, educators, entrepreneurs, member of the security sector, both faith leaders and faith practitioners, and use that unique access that women sometimes have and their nuanced approaches about local vulnerabilities. We need to understand their influence and agency better so that we can not only prevent violent conflict and extremism, but build this alternative to it. We need to take the lessons learned we have from peace building, reforming security sectors, and bring it into our daily policy debates and problem solving. We must remember how women have forged peace, prevented conflict, and improved security by being change agents. And we need to develop early warning and response systems, build relationships with law enforcement or services police, and bridge divisions across communities. As mitigators, they cannot voice their opinions from the sidelines. So we must remember those experiences and perspectives need to be at the table. But more importantly, women have a right to be there as citizens and stakeholders. So how does this fit into the greater work that USAID do? The work that we do. At USAID, we believe that gender equality and women's empowerment isn't just a part of the work we do in development, but it's core to the work we do. The gender policy, which may have been mentioned previously over this. Okay, about 3 years ago, we updated and released the new gender equality and women's empowerment policy at USAID. And I'm just going to go over it broadly because all of the issues that are covered in this, or our three main goals, are really relevant to this topic. The three overarching goals of the USAID gender policy is one, to reduce gender disparities in access to, control over, and benefit of resources, wealth, opportunities, and services. So in the countries where we work, what are the services and resources that are there? Everything from what's provided by the government services, what's provided by the private sector, whether that's access to capital, land ownership, access to credit, these sorts of things, but also what USAID provides. When we provide a training or we provide seeds, are we making sure that men and women have equal access, boys and girls have equal access to those services and resources? Second goal of the policy is to reduce gender-based violence and mitigate its harmful effects. Obviously, that is relevant here, but just looking at broadly the different types of violence that exist in the societies where USAID works, and once again, being proactive to make sure the work that USAID does is not increasing violence against women or other violence in society. And the third is increasing the capability of women and girls to realize their rights, determine their life outcomes, and influence decision-making in households, communities, and societies. And so when you think about this, all of these are completely relevant for the violence and social norms conversation you're having, because you can't just change the institutions and work with individual people to reach these goals. You need to work on the social norms, the attitudes people have about women's fundamental rights in these three areas. And they're certainly relevant when it comes to some of the push and pull factors when it comes to violent extremism. We're still doing a lot of research on this, but is the control and benefit over resources in society, people who come into a society, wherever you are in the world, whether it's in the Middle East or in Europe or in the United States, do they feel that gap in access to resources and feel that they fundamentally have no way to close that gap? And so they are looking for alternatives. With regard to violence that exists in their homes, in their communities, do they see violence as a viable answer to help solve some of the problems and feelings that they're having? And finally, increasing the capability of all people to realize their rights, but specifically with girls and women, well-educated girls and women who are freely recruiting and traveling to some of these conflict areas to participate in these terrorist acts. I think what's somewhat different, although women have been involved in extremism for years, what is fundamentally different about what's going on in Syria and Iraq right now is that they are not recruiting women to be fighters. They are specifically recruiting women to go there, marry, we can put that in quotes, marry a fighter, and have children and cook meals for him and other fighters. And so in previous where we've seen bombers and fighters across the world from Kosovo to from Asia to Chechnyan states, women there, some were there to support the fighters, but some were there to pick up arms or carry bombs or other things. Here it's so specific in gendered roles. So looking at what takes women from what we might call more comfortable situations and drives them to sneak into these places where they're putting their lives on the line really is a gendered aspect. But so far, we have not been looking at it in that way. We have been looking at, first of all, not even focusing on the women as they recruit and move to the area. I mean, the numbers are much smaller than they are for the men. But we have to look, when we're looking at the work that we're doing and researching why men and boys are going there, we also need to look at if it's the same or different from women. So we are engaging women and girls throughout our work to look at these issues with USAID and across a range of sectors, not just in democracy and human rights, but economic growth, in healthcare, and certainly the role of social norms and how that plays into the recruitment strategies is working. It's just a critical component of all of our interventions, these potentially fragile and at-risk communities. So we've also learned that the deficiencies that we're seeing, or the feelings that people have about their communities, why they're willing to go and join these violent extremist groups, is deficiencies in governance. Their own governance, they feel that even if they might have access and they are demanding more of their government is not able to respond. So whether it's services or providing them with opportunity or other things, the economic status, the lack of personal agency, these are issues that we as the USAID can't control, but we can help people better within their own lives feel that they can have more control over this. So we do know that there's often a combination of factors that drive people towards thinking about violent extremism. The mistreatment by the police personally, or they see members of their family or community mistreated, poor education leading to dropouts, and it's a vicious cycle where dropping out of education further isolates them from their community, which then further leads them to not gather more education. It's also marginalization based on age, religious, or other ethnic affiliations. So what we are seeing is how women are affected by these drivers like men, or how they aren't, and how the roles that women play that are often less public, how those relationships between other women within their communities play in this. So we are examining how targeted investments in women, peace, and security can address security-related objectives by strengthening the role of women and youth in political and peace processes, and not the formal peace processes that might be going on in some fancy capital, but in the community level. In places in Syria, we continue to support women who are still in Syria, and they are doing local peace building by providing the services that communities still need. There are still schools and education activities still going on, garbage being picked up, and oftentimes women are leading these efforts, and by providing these services, they're bringing members of the community together who are still left in these conflict areas. So we're trying to involve both women and youth who are at risk and enable them to engage in priority development and reconciliation needs. We're also helping folks advocate for equitable access to justice. So recording their stories, but also helping them get a voice so that they can speak for themselves when the time comes, so that they have that path to both reconciliation and peace. We're also providing productive resources and help reduce vulnerability to violence as we can. And we are committed to expanding our efforts to promote research and innovative initiatives on the gender dimensions of CVE. We know at USAID, and we are trying to work with other governments around the world so that we are no longer having a gender-blind approach to CVE programming or any violence programming or any programming altogether, I should say. So what we are doing ourselves are trying to walk the walk that we encouraged 15 years ago with the National Action Plan. We in the US actually have our own National Action Plan. It took more than a decade, but we do have the National Action Plan on Women, Peace, and Security. It's actually under a 3-year review right now across the defense, diplomacy, and development fields. But certainly this issue of violence and CVE will be part of that review and will be updated in the National Action Plan as we do that. National Action Plans are the most critical policies that we have. We're helping other governments create theirs as well, and helping them integrate CVE so that they can do the critical work on the ground, and we can learn from them as we do research as well. So we will continue to do that. The premise of a NAP is interesting, where it brings civil society together with the government. So it's a bridge that in many places is too far to build between civil society and government, but where we can, we bring them together to talk outside the military complex or security to talk about the real issues how women are affected by war and conflict and violence. I was reading an interesting article the other day when a woman said, the only difference between peace and conflict is which man is hitting me, or which man is abusing me, or which man is raping me. It's always going to happen here. It just depends which side. Is it a guy I know or a guy I don't know? I mean, what a horrific continuum of violence that exists in that country. And so with national action plans, we're trying to bring those voices from civil society to talk not only to the government, but to the security sector to reflect the realities of women's lives, and certainly expanding that on to violent extremism and other more non-traditional conflict. So besides that, this is all just kind of talking broadly about 1325 in the National Action Plan. I think it's much more where we're looking at the social norms and how violence both determines and the social norms are broken with regard to violence and countering violent extremism. We're looking at ways to empower women that doesn't put them at greater risks and actually moves them into places of leadership. So as we've said before, they're not only helping to prevent violence in their everyday lives, but in these places of conflict and extremism. And promoting equal societies overall, that we cannot do it in a vacuum. We can't change the institutions without changing the attitudes. So there's also, because we're in the 15th anniversary of 1325, around the world this conversation is taking place more and more. I met with folks from other governments at the UN General Assembly last month up in New York, and so other governments from the north, south, places like Pakistan who are living it on a daily basis and trying to figure out the role gender can play in fighting their own local extremism. It's going to be coming more and more, and if there are folks here who are doing research on this, we're just hungry for information so that we can learn, do better, and be more specific in the interventions that we have. So thanks so much. I look forward to hearing from all of you and Noreen as well. Thanks.